Shrek, Fiona!
Donkey!
You are cordially invited
Dinner is served!
Everybody dig in.
Don't mind if I do, Lillian.
to meet the family.
It's easy to see where Fiona gets her good looks from.
Discover what happens
Shrek and Donkey on another whirlwind adventure.
after Happily Ever After.
Now, where were we?
Donkey!
DreamWorks Pictures presents Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, Cameron Diaz, and Antonio Banderas. Shrek 2.
Hello, and welcome to episode 34 of We'll Review It Our Shelves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks, we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan. And you are, good sir?
I am Daniel.
Are you an ogre?
Danny? No. Never have been.
Are you sure? You weren't cursed at birth?
Of all the names that I've been called, Ogre was definitely not one of them.
Oh, well, okay. We are going to be talking about Shrek 2 today, and we have no listener feedback on any of our previous episodes to update you on, so we'll jump right into the how did this get on your shelf? Would you like to go first, Dan?
Well, since it's not on my shelf, I think you should go first.
I'm stunned. Okay. This movie is on my shelf because I care a great deal for the entertainment value of the Shrek franchise. I think that DreamWorks did an absolutely fantastic job getting some animation out there to try and compete with Disney. Don't know that they sustained it, but we might kind of talk about that a little bit. And I own it because I enjoyed the movie.
All right. Yeah, I watched it through that streaming service who we mentioned and are not that we
Did
are
you watch it
definitely...
on Crackle?
No,
you didn't watch it on Crackle?
That other streaming service that we mentioned numerous times, even though they are not paying us to do so. So I hope you appreciate all that free advertisement. I won't mention their name. Amazon.
I was going to say Amazon.
No, so yeah, I watched it through the streaming, but it's funny, kind of good segue into the first topic of discussion on this is like, yeah, it was good competition for Disney, but it doesn't seem that they really sustained it, at least not at a significant level. And that was the reason why I don't really own this, why I never really bought it. And while I'm not taking away from its entertainment value, there were a lot of funny... I mean, the first time I saw it, yeah, it made me laugh, and it was like, see, when you see all the references, but to me, it was one of those comedies that you can't watch too soon together. There are movies that make me laugh no matter how many times I see it and how quickly I see it, no matter how much rapid succession. But, this isn't one of those movies where, it's been... I think the last time I watched this was maybe like the first time I watched this. And so, yeah, it made me laugh because of the space in between. I'm like, because a lot of the jokes I don't remember and everything like that. But if I was to watch it again tomorrow, I doubt it would be as funny for me. It's just, like I said, it's just one of those comedies that doesn't sustain, and I have some hypotheses as to why that is.
Yeah, I'm curious as to your hypotheses, but I wanted to touch on what you'd said about watching this with some separation between viewings, and I agree with that, but the thing that you'd said about some of the jokes might not land the second time, I was sitting here trying to figure out if I agreed with that or not, and I gotta say, I think I agree with it mostly, because there were a lot of things when I watched this on the rewatch and saw the cultural references and just some of the flat-out jokes that I thought were funny the first time, and I might think they were funny on another watch because I would be laughing and miss something the first time around, or on this rewatch. But I think that there are some things you're like, on a rewatch, it's kind of I forgot this joke was in there, that's funny. But the second time you'd be like, yeah, I didn't forget that was in there. It's still mildly amusing, but it's not as funny as it was. I think I agree with your conclusion. I think there are a few jokes in there that would just sort of would be funny regardless.
It's not a matter of whether or not you agree and everything, but I mean, you understand. I mean, you and I have very similar tastes, and are movies.
Except when it comes to horror and
So I
musicals.
said similar, not identical.
See episode 13, listeners.
So yeah, like I said, some of the jokes, it's like, and this is the weird. I don't want to use the word juxtaposition because I don't think it applies here. But this is the inconsistency. One of my hypotheses, one of my guesses, one of my assumptions as to why this.
We're not scientists. You can use the word theory in the more layman sense.
Is that a lot of these jokes are what I call time sensitive, pop culture references, a lot of current event type things, things that people down the line may or may not understand. It depends how much of a social history nerd that you are. I mean, you and I kind of fit in that genre a little bit. We understand what cultural references were for certain times. Not everybody is like that. But even for someone like me who does understand a lot of them are just, for the lack of a better term, they're tired, they're used up type of thing. It's like, it's really not funny anymore.
I will slightly disagree with you because I think sometimes things are so old they're new again.
Sometimes, and that's what I was saying. And the reason why I said the inconsistency, the juxtaposition, or whatever appropriate word, is the movie Airplane. Now, a lot of those jokes, you watch that, they were very relevant to the 70s. And I already know, because, my wife is from, a different generation. And, sometimes when we watch it, she doesn't understand all the jokes. But the funny thing is when I explain them, then she finds them kind of amusing. Which is really weird because it's like, wow, even after all that time, the humor still works if you understand the reference.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the timeless thing about some comedies is if it's not in the moment, like you're saying, there are a metric crap ton of movie references that if you don't know the movie, you wouldn't get the reference, like the Lord of the Rings, the Spider-Man. I mean, there's a ton of them.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though. Even knowing the reference, I think, if you know the reference for this one, I don't think they would be as funny as the jokes in the movie Airplane are today. Whether or not you understand their references, I don't think it's going to make a difference in this movie if you understand the references, because I don't think the jokes are landed quite as artfully and succinctly as they were in Airplane. It's my opinion. It's my opinion, so.
Well, that's what this show is all about, is expressing our opinion. So let me ask you this. Could you watch Airplane back to back to back and still find it funny?
Absolutely.
I agree, and I can't wait to review that. Although, again, spoilers for where that's going to go on my shelf.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Not only can I watch it back to back, I use those references 3 or 4 times a week while I bring up the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar scene.
I am constantly referring to I can make a hat, I can make a brooch, I can make a pterodactyl.
Mm-hmm. And one of my jobs, I work with a man named Leo, so every now and again, and Leo's getting large. And the funny thing about that joke is Leo is a tiny little Filipino guy. So
he's not really getting larger.
No, he's not. So that's what makes it funnier, Leo's getting larger, and he just looks at me like I'm crazy, which, okay, he's not entirely wrong, but...
But I do agree that a lot of the jokes in this movie do not go past the time frame that they're in. So I found them funny because I knew the references. I don't know that this is one of those movies that 40, 50 years from now, people are going to look at this and go, oh, this is a great comedic work of art. It's a fun movie. It has a lot of good stuff, but unlike Airplane, which is so outlandishly funny, it will stand the test of time. I mean, Airplane was made in the 70s, and we're still talking about it 40 years later, and we're still laughing about it.
Oh, yeah. And even though younger audiences who watch it today need an explanation every few scenes, they're still laughing, and for the most part. I mean, if they don't get all of the jokes, they get maybe 2/3 of them, and that's enough to make the movie a classic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And still popular to this day. Whereas to not just sound like I'm rambling on, about how this isn't consistently funny, it's like some of the big jokes with Shrek, they surround that, he's an ogre, that he's uncouth, that he doesn't have the same manners that regular people do. So there's a lot of body humor. There's a lot of fart jokes.
Yes.
Which, okay, they're funny. I laugh at them. Some people want to call it toilet humor. Some people want to say juvenile, but it still makes me laugh.
That is immature toilet humor.
Yeah. But as funny as I find them in the now, Again, if you tell me the same joke 5 minutes later, it's like, you just told that joke. It was funny once, but it's, and that's, like I said, that's why I don't think this movie warrants a purchase for me.
Well, okay, so this goes to kind of why we started this podcast in the first place, was looking for really a reason to rewatch the movies on my shelf, which again goes to why I invited you. So it speaks to, I don't necessarily rewatch these movies. I'll buy them and then watch them after I buy them, and then they'll sit there collecting dust for a while until I have a real reason to give it another watch. This podcast gives me that reason, and now we get to talk about it. So I own it because I liked it and because I enjoyed it at the time, but I will say that if I didn't own it, I wouldn't miss not owning it, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense, and I think that's one of the differences between you and me. As much as we're similar, that's the difference for me, because when I buy a film, it doesn't affect that I want to have this, because if I want to watch it over and over again, that I have that capability. To have that freedom to say, I want to watch it now, and I'm going to watch it now.
And I think, and this could be part of the reason that I have a larger DVD collection than I did when I was younger. I didn't really have a lot of VHS cassettes because I didn't really have a good place to store them, because flip-flopping between staying with friends or having lots of roommates or having just the ship to live in, I didn't really have a lot of place to store it. I mean, I had a VCR and I would go rent movies, but at the time, you could go down to the local grocery store and rent videos. You didn't just have to go to Blockbuster. There was always, the mom and pop convenience store that had a video selection or stuff like that. So it was never really that big of a deal. As I got older and more into what we'll call a stable home type environment, where I actually had a home and had a place to store things, I got a few more, but really I didn't start collecting movies until DVDs came along. And that was, again, predicated on having a place to store them, and they were smaller and less
intrusive.
Yes, and less, I can't think of the word, but if you watch a VHS over and over and over again, it stretches, it starts to get caught in the reels and all that kind of stuff of the VCR. So, but DVDs don't do that. So that's kind of why I got behind DVD as a format. And now that I kind of have this weird reluctance to get rid of DVDs, whether I want them or not, I have a ton of DVDs that we bought on a lark, or as evidenced by the Scooby-Doo episode that we did with, it was it was something that we bought for our kids. So I know that there are a number of videos I'm probably never going to watch again except for this podcast, but I have a hard time getting rid of them because that's my stuff, and that's why I'm in this boat where I only have 400 movies. You have what, 1,100 you said at one point?
11, 1,200, something in that neighborhood. I never actually sat down and counted. But it's 3 full bookshelves, and there's still some that sit on the shelves that aren't exactly filed in because there's just no room.
So while you want the movies to watch over and over again, I'm actually pretty picky about what I do actually get and what I get from me.
That's the funny thing is, I used to be like you. I used to buy a lot of movies on a whim, and I thought, it'd be cool to have these and everything. But then, some of these movies now, things change, attitudes change, tastes change, everything. I mean, I had a bunch of Mel Gibson movies and everything, but, in light of his indiscretions and then his quote-unquote historical movies are less than, it's like I start to say, I really don't want these movies anymore. And, I sell them and, the collection evolves. And I have been a lot more picky. I've been a little more, for lack of a better term, frugal with what I spend my money on. But there's still numerous titles out there that, I desire to have in my collection, to have in my library, that's still rounded out. As Pandora says, your music genome. Well, this is my cinematic genome, and it's quite detailed. So to say that I'm not picky, that's inaccurate. I am very picky.
Well, I wasn't implying that you weren't.
I'm prolific.
You weren't picky. What I was saying was I'm far more willing to accept that I rented this from Redbox now and watched it because I wanted to see it, and then I will usually use that as an impetus as to whether or not I'm going to make the purchase myself. And the other thing is having access to Hulu and Netflix and Amazon have opened up a wealth of movies that I didn't previously have access to. So I don't buy as many DVDs and Blu-rays as I used to, but as I think we mentioned on the podcast before, I was able to pick up the 7-disc box set, or 6-disc box set of the Planet of the Apes movies, the original 70s ones, and that was a prize. I was like, oh, I got a box set, and it was still unopened, and I got it for $20 at the Goodwill store. So, you know, I
nice.
Not so much that I'm picky, because I'll watch a lot of movies, but a lot of times I'll just watch them if they come on television and think, oh, you know what, I really would like to own that. But then I forget to go out and actually, buy it. So
yeah, it's funny that you mentioned though that Treasures. I mean, that was our very first podcast that I mentioned when we did it on Casablanca, and I had found that special edition that had the movie poster, postcards, and all the other little tchotchkes that it came with, and it was such a beautiful edition, beautiful packaging. When it was first released, it was like $80, and I found it for $5 or something like that.
Oh yeah,
it's like
yeah.
You find those little treasures and everything. But the other thing though that you made me think of, and this isn't in my notes, it's kind of impromptu. You were talking about how you watched movies that weren't necessarily yours, and you left it at that. Isn't it kind of funny that when DVDs first came out, and then roughly about the same time, maybe a little bit afterward, then came out like DVD recorders. Or or like with computers, you were able to
DVDRs and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
you were able to burn your own DVDs, and there was that great concern that people were gonna pirate these things and everything. But now that we have like all this streaming, where I would think that somebody would be able to record perfectly off of streaming and make a nice little uninterrupted DVD recording off of all the streaming services and everything. It really that isn't much of a thing anymore, because I mean, as much as we love DVDs / Blu-rays, but everyone says that it's kind of a genre that's kind of on the downslope a little bit. They're not as popular. I'll just say they're not as popular.
Yeah.
Because of all the streaming and everything. So it's like, do you think that fear of that level of piracy is gone, or is it just
I don't think that it's gone. I think
now?
It's just minimized. I can tell you right now that there are spots on the internet where you can go find whatever shows you want. And it's not a torrent site. I mean, I've talked to people who will happily download things. I have tended to shy away from it because I would much rather own the thing. There's no joy in just kind of getting something that you shouldn't necessarily own. And the people that created the movie don't get any return on that. And as I've come to know more and more artists, writers, people in different industries, it became more and more important to me that they actually get the money for their works. Whether it's a second-run DVD that I paid $5 for that was still an original one that they're going to get a 10-cent royalty on, they're getting a 10-cent royalty. That's their money. They should, by all rights, get it. So that's the way I feel. But I think, going to your question, the advent of all of the streaming services has greatly reduced the number of people that do it willy-nilly. I think it just put people in the, it just made it smaller. Made the number of people that actually do it smaller.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, I don't hear so much about it. I mean, you'll still see the intro ads when you pop your disc into the player and you see piracy is not a victimless crime or whatever.
FBI Director Mueller, ironically.
Yeah. That's actually kind of funny. Wow, didn't think about that. But yeah, like I said, I mean, it's not something I ever supported. I mean, every now and again in my past, I downloaded a few songs here and there. But you remember, I had a huge CD collection, so I mean, obviously.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I wanted production. I used to joke with my mom. It's like when it came to my music and my movies or anything, I'm a snob. I want the production model. I don't want somebody pirated or slapped together.
Or some people are like five files on one DVD and said, "Oh, here, you can just watch this on your computer." Like, no, I want to watch it. There's a reason I have an entertainment center.
Yeah, or the ones that they stole from whatever academy and said, and always flash for your consideration across the screen. Yeah, that's not how you see it in the theater. You don't see that strolling across. You kind of have that confused face. You ever seen?
Oh yeah, no, I've seen
disc
DVD screeners before. Like, ooh, subtitles.
Yeah,
it just says the same thing over
Yeah,
and over
'cause-
and over again.
You know, for your consideration, or this is property of, you know, and it's just like, no, I don't want that. I want something nice. I don't think I paid too much to get that either. It's not that much. You know, some people want to pay through the nose to get something really nice. For me, that's nice, and it doesn't break my bank every time I get one.
And I look at it this way: there are some movies that I will just wait until it's a little bit cheaper to get, until I can get it maybe used or something like that. I don't have a problem with that. But there are some movies that I will rush out and get. Oh, it's Tuesday, got to go get the new movie. But not to go even further down this rabbit hole, because we are here to talk about Shrek 2. The only thing that I will say is at one point in my life, in the mid-90s, I had a friend who drove for a car service, and one of the things that he would occasionally do is take the final edited version of movies from the studio to the production company, or from one place to another, wherever they were supposed to go. And he actually moved a few movies in his car from one place to another, and he said, yeah, people will actually offer you money to stop, break the seal, let them make a copy, and move on. He never did it, which would be a fireable offense, which is one, why he didn't do it, and two, because he's just an honest person. But so the one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about this movie and sort of bring it back around is when I bought this, again, I was on a big DVD kick, and it just didn't matter. Like, no, we'll get that. That's fine. We'll get that. I still enjoy the movie, and I think that going back to what we'd spoken about earlier, the cultural references, I think that most of the cultural references, especially in the first 4 minutes of the movie when Shrek and Fiona get married, are perfectly legit on their own as mildly amusing. But when you know what it came from, like the Spider-Man homage, the Lord of the Rings homage, it makes it even more entertaining. But there are a lot of other jokes in there, like fart jokes are timeless. You can't beat a good fart joke if you know that's what you're getting into. There are lines that Eddie Murphy uses that show his age, or show the age that he grew up in, because when they roll into Far, Far Away, he talks about champagne wishes and caviar dreams, and that's just a mildly amusing line, but when you know that it was from Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, hosted by Robin Leach, I'm Robin Leach with a voice so loud even animals go, who the are you? It does make them even funnier. So I think this movie in general has a lot of good jokes, but the cultural references are just insane. And all of the Shrek movies are like that. There's references to E.T. in here. I was doing some research. I mean, I took notes and I did some research before this, but there are other references that are outside of the popular culture of the age. There's the reference to the 7-year itch, when Fiona's dress gets blown up, when the fairy godmother comes in.
About to say, that's not so much references evolved beyond a simple movie reference now, because that has been used so much in other movies, in commercials, and it's now just become Hollywood. Yeah, anytime you see the image of Marilyn Monroe or some image look-alike of her with the dress being blown up like that, I don't think there are too many people who would understand that came from the 7-year itch. Rather, that's just a Hollywood thing, so timeless reference, I guess.
I agree. That is one of those things that is imbued in the culture, and it's one of the movies, like, I don't know many people that will remember every single Marilyn Monroe movie, but they know that scene.
They don't know what it's from and everything, but they know if they, I'm impressed if they even know that that's Marilyn Monroe sometimes. Because, like I said, it's evolved so much because so many different people have used it. So many different categories of entertainment / advertising have used it. So it's just, they just see it as a Hollywood thing.
Oh, right. That and the rolling in the water scene at the very beginning when they're having the picnic at the ocean.
Yeah, From Here to Eternity.
Yeah.
The wave, they're kissing on the beach, the wave rolls over them.
Mm-hmm. And then,
oddly enough, used an airplane.
Yes, back to Airplane again. But that is a cultural reference that goes beyond just that one movie, that it's used in a lot of different things. The Fabulous Baker Boys, again, you don't have to necessarily know or have seen the entire movie to kind of get that reference, but even so, it's a great reference to lying on the piano and that sort of thing. I mean, it's kind of a trope, so that's funny on its own, but it is a reference to another movie. I don't necessarily know that you have to know the reference, but knowing the reference does make it a little funnier.
Yeah, actually, a good example of that was the giant gingerbread man who he affectionately named Mongo. And Nina didn't know what's with the Mongo thing. And I said, yeah, Blazing Saddles. The big guy who was sent to kill the sheriff. He was big. He wasn't bright. He was Mongo. And it's like, oh. And then she chuckled at it. So, yeah, I mean, if she knew the reference, then it made it a little funnier for her.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I only chuckled at that as well, and I understood the reference. So I don't know that I got a bigger reaction initially out of knowing it in the first place. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
I mean, we could talk about the number of movie references in here all day long, but one thing we haven't touched on is the overarching movie reference that this sort of speaks to, in my mind, and that's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Okay, I see that now. That's
with a fairy tale, comedic, animated take.
Yeah, a fairy-tale, nuanced satire of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. No, I like that. I didn't even think about that. And that was such a great movie, too. So relevant to today's atmosphere.
Yes.
But,
again, old movies coming back around.
Yeah. The thing I was going to say, the obvious references at this movie or homages or satire and ridicule, I should say, that, this and the Shrek franchise in general, I think this is what made it famous in the very first one, is that this is the anti-Disney animation, to coin my own phrase. This is the poke fun at Disney because they've had the throne for so long, and this is their kind of attempt at saying, no, this is like the political satire. This is making fun of the king. I mean, I lost count because I was just kind of taking a tally of all the Disney references, and you lose count. It's like, all right,
agreed.
They're making fun of Disney left and right. They're taking them down a notch, at least attempting to.
I have it in my notes. It said lots of Disney references and what we'll call mild mocking. Obviously, they couldn't have made it if Disney hadn't done all that stuff. They'd have had to do something else. But yeah, this Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, pick something. There's probably a Disney reference in it.
Oh, well, Tinkerbell at the mud bath scene. Pinocchio, of course, is a reoccurring character. The Three Little Pigs, not necessarily known as a Disney, but the Three Little Pigs were Disney characters for a while.
I see, and while I agree with you, or rather, I don't have a choice but to agree with you because that's a fact and I can't change it, but from the standpoint of catching the Three Little Pigs as Disney characters, I gotta say, I don't know that most people will make that particular connection. While true, yes. The Pinocchio, yeah, sure, we'll jump on that. But the Pinocchio reference has been constant throughout, so that wasn't particularly new. He shows up in all of the Shrek movies. The Gingerbread Man, again, makes a recurrence, or reappears, or appears again, whatever. But the Puss in Boots, that's not really a Disney thing. The Fairy Godmother obviously was a knock on Disney, but it was just a knock on fairy tales in the first place.
Yeah, I liked... This is funny, too, because there's a little segue here. Again, the Disney references, when you're entered far, far away and they're going through the glitzy neighborhood and you saw Cinderella's gate and what was the other princess? Like Sleeping Beauty or something
Rapunzel.
Like that. Yeah, Rapunzel's house and everything. And it's funny because I also said it's like, wow, just the animation style and, that it is CGI. It really looked like a street that you find in Grand Theft Auto. It's like, in Grand Theft Auto, in the city, you got the crappy neighborhoods and you got the nice neighborhoods. And that nice neighborhood in Shrek looked like the nice neighborhood in Grand Theft Auto.
Well, it was Beverly Hills, so, one expects Beverly Hills to look nice.
And it did. And I was half expecting a car to go driving through and having a shootout and tossing a dead hooker out of the truck.
Jesus. Once again, Dan goes dark.
But this is a kid's movie.
Is it a kid's movie, though? I mean, really, it is because it's animated, and most people tend to think of animated movies for kids. But there were a lot of references in this that, while Disney will make their snide adult comments infused in their kids movies, this was a lot more adult, and there was a bunch of stuff that kids would like fart jokes. Kids love fart jokes.
Yeah, I think it was still juvenile. I think in the sense that a lot of the humor, it was still adult humor, but I think the delivery and the frequency brought it down to where, high school collegiate or, first year collegiate or whatever, Revenge of the Nerds level type humor.
Yeah, but I think, again, like you said, there's just enough animation for the kids to be entertained by it, and while they may not necessarily understand the references, they like the animation.
Yeah.
I was looking through my notes again and looking at one of the websites, and one of the references in this movie is when Antonio Banderas is told to get his rich Corinthian leather boots out of my face. Like, not that I don't think that people say rich Corinthian leather anymore, because they don't. Most people, when I say it, stare at me like I have a third eye. But if you recall, in the 70s, Ricardo Montalban told us about the rich Corinthian leather in the Chrysler Cordoba. And, to have Antonio Banderas do it with the accent, you're like,
That's some deep cultural references.
Yeah, and I think those are some of the things that are good about this movie, is it definitely doesn't focus on any particular decade. It goes through a lot of different movie tropes, yeah.
Even I had to look up who Shirley Bassey was. The scene when they thought they were going to meet the king on a hunting trip, and so past the tree with the scary branches and the rock, and then the bush that looks like Shirley Bassey.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, who is Shirley Bassey? And just for reference here, she was a singer. I guess most notably, she sang the theme to Goldfinger, James Bond movie. But yeah, even I had to be like, okay, that means something.
Yeah, I remember the line. I didn't look up who that was, and thank you for that, because I did not know who she was. I just knew it was some cultural reference that I didn't get.
Yeah, so, hey, I learned something new.
Yeah. What did you think of the voice talents? Obviously, Mike Myers is Shrek, and, he did 4 movies. Eddie Murphy, Donkey, Cameron Diaz is Fiona, but the additional ones that they added for this movie, Julie Andrews, Antonio Banderas, and John Cleese in particular, and Rupert Everett, Jennifer Saunders as Prince Charming and the Fairy Godmother. Those are the bigs. Did you think they were worthwhile additions?
I think it's just being an ensemble cast and being there. Julie Andrews really didn't play a whole lot up to being Julie Andrews in that. So I think they were just there. I don't know if they really made a difference.
Could have been anybody, huh?
I think it was just like, oh yeah, that was John Cleese. Interesting. Okay, cool. But it just, I don't know. It didn't seem to add much more to it other than, hey, it's John Cleese. Hey, it's Julie Andrews. I did like a little, and for some reason, Jennifer Saunders was the one I kind of highlighted. I used to watch her in Absolutely Fabulous, and I think that she played a little bit more up to that persona. It's like, I'm going to do something that I'm going to regret, and then she ordered the fast food. Like, oh yeah, that's Jennifer Saunders. Okay, yeah. So to me, that was the only one that really stood out to me as anything, but I don't think anybody else, again, it was just the name, and I think the jokes would have been funny if it were anybody else famous.
I disagree in the case of Antonio Banderas. I think he was the right person for Puss in Boots, the way they created the character and what they did with him. He was a Zorro-esque character. Antonio Banderas played Zorro in 2 movies, and I think the accent, Antonio Banderas dialing up the accent to 11D2 really put some meat in that character.
Didn't he have his own movie?
Yes, he did.
Puss in Boots? Yeah, so I guess, so you're onto something there. I think, I guess I can agree with that. Antonio Banderas did definitely add to something to that.
I will agree with you that I think Julie Andrews and John Cleese, Rupert Everett, you're like, okay, I can take him or leave him as far as them being in this movie. I like all of them. I love John Cleese. I love Monty Python. I like Julie Andrews in just about everything I've ever seen her in. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I agree. I think you could have swapped out somebody else famous, put them in, and I wouldn't have noticed the difference in the what we got out of them in this movie. It was nothing particularly groundbreaking or, oh my God, that's the only person I could see doing that, like Robin Williams as the genie in Aladdin.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, with that, you had somebody who had a larger-than-life personality who really injected that into the character. And I don't think anybody else could have done that. At least not that way. You know, if you had a different comedian and they animated the character to fit that comedian, I'm not saying it wouldn't have been as good. It just wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah, that's why I think the second Aladdin movie didn't go nearly as far as the third one. I think the first one was obviously big and what got the whole thing going, but few people remember the second one. But I think more people remember the third one because it did have Robin Williams in it as the genie again. So, talking about the voice talent, Mike Myers, what's your take on him as a comedian or as a comic actor?
I always liked him. As far as him doing his accents, they were always a source of entertainment. I mean, I never put him on my favorites list, but I always was entertained by him. It's unfortunate that his career went the way that it did. I hope to see him again soon. I hope he gets a resurgence.
Well, he's on the Gong Show right now, so I don't know that it is. But then again, Alec Baldwin also on an old remake of a 70s game show, so The Match Game.
Hey, you know, I mean, all I look at is Robert Downey Jr. You know, he hit rock bottom, and look where he is now. It can be done.
Oh, absolutely.
It can happen.
I gotta say, the 2000s were Mike Myers' boom time, if you will. He had Wayne's World 1 and 2, all the Shrek movies, So I Married an Axe Murderer, Austin Powers. But then he sort of disappeared because he was always kind of the same goofy guy. He's done a few other things since then and done some more serious work. But I don't think that he's ever come back to that same level of fame, I guess, or notoriety that he did in, you know, the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, well, I mean, he really jumped the shark with Love Guru. I think that kind of just said, yeah, we're not really into him anymore. And when I say we, I mean just like society in general. The pop culture audience.
Yeah, I think the Love Guru was quite much, and...
Just say that it sucked.
Okay, yeah, it sucked. I mean, he did do Shrek Forever after that, but that was about it. After that, it just seems like he sort of disappeared. And looking on his IMDb page... It looks like there's an Austin Powers 4 movie, just rumored. I don't know that I need to see another Austin Powers movie. I think I was good with 2. They made a 3rd, and I was like, okay, that was a thing that happened.
Well, I gotta say, it's like, I don't need to see one if it's going to be more of the same. If it's going to be the same Austin Powers, who is still the fish out of water, a man out of his time, then, you know, yeah, you're right, I don't need to see that.
I agree with you. I don't think we need another Austin Powers movie that's just going to be more Austin Powers doing Austin Powers-y stuff.
On the flip side of that, you know, and again, not just for the sake of balance, but if it's an Austin Powers movie where he's older, he's adapted, and he's got to deal with an entirely different situation other than just getting used to being in the 2000s rather than being in the 60s, maybe I might find that entertaining. Maybe I might put some money down to see a matinee on that. You know, it's like, maybe I'll do that. But that's the thing, I don't see them doing that. I see them trying to think, whoa, those movies made money, let's try to make more money.
So, riddle me this, Batman. How many fourth movies have ever really been that great, that weren't built into the concept of a 4-movie, like Harry Potter? I will rationally say that I think those movies just got better and better as they went along. Okay,
well, there goes my one answer.
You didn't like the fourth Harry Potter movie?
No. That's the thing. You took my answer. That was an example of a fourth movie that was at least as good because, yeah, it was part of a whole larger story. I've got to say Star Trek movies.
Okay, we have 2 examples so far.
Okay, I'm not going to say Star Wars because
the fourth movie was Episode 1, and that would be a prequel. And
that was the unfortunate event of
98.
Of what it was.
Or 99, rather.
It being Episode 1, and, you know, yeah, a lot to talk about that one, so I guess we'll have to wait till we review that one. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to look through all my entire movie collection.
Let me give you a couple of examples of bad ones. Obviously, the one you mentioned, The Phantom Menace.
Okay.
We'll go back to the Planet of the Apes movies. As they went along, they just got worse. No one was clamoring for a 4th Planet of the Apes movie, but they made one. Okay.
Uh-huh.
No one thought that you could take Indiana Jones and butcher him, but they did. 4th movies don't generally tend to work out that well. So I would be curious to see what the trailers look like, but it's still only rumored, so, you know, let's not count our chickens.
You know, though, I gotta say, just kind of branching off a little bit, a branch off on the evolutionary tree here of pop culture and entertainment, I gotta say, I can name off a number of video games where the fourth were freaking fantastic.
Okay.
Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag, easily the best Assassin's Creed. God of War, even though it doesn't have a number 4 of it, but where he flipped to the Norse mythology, top notch. Uncharted 4, excellent conclusion to the Uncharted franchise. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe video games just do it better. Who knows?
I will say that the fourth movie in this franchise was not a complete and total waste of time. I found that amusing and entertaining as well. Didn't necessarily need it. But again, so, talking about fourths and Disney, which we weren't talking about Disney specifically, but, they're talking about making a Toy Story 4, and I don't necessarily know that I need that. It was such a complete story wrapped up in those 3 movies that I don't see where they can go anywhere else with it that they haven't already done. Now, they could surprise me.
And that's going to be my response, is that, yeah, in an overall moviegoer, movie enthusiast, yeah, the last one, that was such a beautiful ending. It was I don't think they could have done any better to conclude that story arc. And that's it. That's I was ready to say, okay, we're done. That was beautiful. Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't think we need a fourth one. But Pixar has surprised me.
True.
And so I'm really conflicted on that, and I will give them the benefit of the doubt because it's Pixar.
Fair enough.
Anybody else, again, Austin Powers and Mike, I don't have any faith. Pixar, okay, surprise me. Do what you do.
But that's the thing that I was just going to say is Mike Myers is a great comedic actor, or rather, for the time, for the late 90s, early 2000s, he was great. In an entertaining kind of like, oh, hey, it's that new Mike Myers movie or whatever. Yay. He's not one of those comedians that developed into a more serious actor. Like Tom Hanks started his life as a comedian. And now it's hard to look at Tom Hanks and think, oh, yeah, he's a comedian. Like, no, he's Tom Hanks. He's developed his own actorial persona. Eddie Murphy had some funny action movies. He had the Beverly Hills Cop movies and 48 Hours. And then he kind of disappeared for a while. Had some personal stuff in his life that happened. And then he came back and he was reaching some notoriety monetarily in pop culture with the Nutty Professor movies. But Dr. Dolittle and Haunted Mansion, not really his finest works and not terribly funny. They were just way more geared towards kids. And, they weren't that good.
He didn't really go, he didn't cross genres. He never did go into dramatic or...
No, he actually did do a few serious movies. Nothing... well, he actually did do a couple of, I don't want to say serious movies, but reasonably serious movies. He was in Dreamgirls, and he wasn't playing a goofy character. I mean, he was actually taking a serious turn. But his entire filmography... it is 99% comedies. So, yeah, I give you that, but he did try to do something serious. Didn't necessarily work. I think from the mid-90s on, it was kind of like, oh, yeah, that's Eddie Murphy, but meh. Not really that excited about seeing a movie just because it's got Eddie Murphy in it. Speaking of movies that probably don't need to be made, Beverly Hills Cop 4. Again, fourth movies. Don't know that they need to make it. I would rather see Shrek 5. I would rather see him reprise his role as Donkey. Which brings me to my next point. This movie and all of the Shrek movies capitalize on what Mike Myers does best, and that's that thick, over-the-top Scottish accent that he did so well in So I Married an Axe Murderer, and then obviously, these movies. Every time I watch these movies, I probably have to deprogram myself from doing that crap Scottish accent because it's just fun. I'm an ogre! It's what he did best. So I'm glad he made some money off of it. He's not, again, on my list of Academy Award-winning actors that are underrated.
Fair assessment. I don't want to go so far as to call him a one-trick pony, but pretty close.
I don't think he's necessarily a one-trick pony because Austin Powers didn't capitalize on the Scottish accent thing, but he's a lot like Jim Carrey in that Jim Carrey did a few things, he did them really well, he reached a peak, and then he just sort of went into other things. Like I said, Mike Myers is currently doing The Gong Show. He's hosting that. So
here's a question that was posed to me in a casual conversation. And I wish I remembered to do it, or maybe I will remember to do it, to put it on our Uber Nerds thing. Do you think Mike Myers could have pulled off Montgomery Scott in the reboot of Star Trek?
No.
You don't think so?
No.
Interesting. That's a very summary no.
I just don't think that he's a serious enough actor for me to look at him and go, that's Scotty. I gotta say, I didn't really know who Simon Pegg was before he was cast in the role, so I accepted, like, okay, I don't really know who that guy is. All right, got it.
Yeah, I did know who he was, and I was like, okay, that sounds like fun. But then later on, upon thinking, it's like, yeah, it's just fun. I don't know if that's a good fit for him. I mean, Zachary Quinto as Spock, boom, on target, spot on.
I think they nailed that casting.
Simon Pegg, though, I don't know. He's fun. I like him. I mean, I know a lot of people are going to think, oh, blasphemy, how dare you speak ill will of Simon Pegg. But no, I mean, for that role, I think they might have could have done a little better. Sorry.
So, again, we are way off target. The Star Trek reboot universe, the Kelvin universe as it's referred to, it is what it is. It's not your daddy's Star Trek, as they say. It's a lot more about the action and a lot less about the discovering new worlds and boldly going where no one has gone before kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And it's some crazy-ass time loop, because in those movies, they have as classic music is the Beastie Boys. But in one of their songs, they reference a nerve pinch from Mr. Spock, who somehow they predicted his existence several hundred years before his existence.
The Beastie Boys
noodle
were
on
prophets.
that there, folks.
They were prophets.
Yeah. Debate, go.
All right, listeners, send us your feedback. But yeah, so again, I think Mike Myers, getting back to what started this conversation, this was his big thing. He could do this.
This was his deal. This is what made it. And I think that's, again, not to sound too harsh, though, I think this is what a lot of people got bored with.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly where I was going, is you can only do this one thing so long, unless you're super unique at it and no one else can do it. Because I think other people can do a faux Scottish accent over the top, all that kind of stuff.
Let me ask you this, though. What would you think if Sean Connery did Shrek?
I think Mike Myers is the right person to play Shrek. I didn't say that. But it's like using Sean Connery. If Sean Connery had continued to play Bond, James Bond, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have as many movies as we have now. Show me any franchise where the same person has played the same character for 20 movies. That's not some kid's movie that is, put out by Disney that needs to be made, like in 47 minutes, and then they make the next movie.
Well, you have your Marvel franchise. That's about as close as we can get. Star Trek.
And Star Trek, way more so, because I don't think those guys really did much of anything in general, not any one specific person, but in general, that they did anything more than Star Trek, and then tributes to Star Trek, and then coming back to do Star Trek again, to make 6 movies, after their series had been off the air for 20 years, or 15 years, or something like that. That works. But again, that's one example out of how many? Yeah,
lots. I don't have an exact number for you, but lots and lots.
So for Mike Myers to continue going to that well, you can only do it so many times unless you're really, really injecting fresh life into it.
Mike Myers, I think that's kind of why he fell out of favor, is that he just, for whatever reason, just didn't have the ability to inject any new life into the Scottish ogre.
Yeah, it's like giving the elevator pitch for Shrek 5 is, Okay, so we're going to have Shrek, and he's going to be in a swamp, and he's going to have marital problems. Why are you doing that accent? I don't know, but I think maybe we should have someone like this in the movie talking to Shrek. What do you think? No, that sounds dumb. Come back to me when you have something better.
If only that really happened in Hollywood.
Well, I mean, they got to make movies and keep people eating. But this one, again, was a worthy successor to the original, because the original was chock full of cultural references. I don't think as many as this one, though. I think the first one, less culture, a little more comedy, or pop culture, a little more comedy. This one was like dialed up pop culture references, especially like
Oh, yeah.
Farbucks. And I got to say, and this is in my notes, and now that I brought it up, I really have to say it. It was absolutely just flabbergastingly funny when Mongo is storming the castle and he stops to get that Starbucks, and all of the citizenry from far, far away scream out of the Starbucks, or Farbucks rather, run right across the street and into another Farbucks.
Straight into another one. Yeah, that was pretty funny.
And when I was in San Diego years and years and years ago, and I don't know if it's that way still, but there were a couple of points where you could stand inside of a Starbucks, walk to the little window, railing counter thing that most of them have, set your coffee down, turn 35 degrees to the left, and see a Starbucks right across the street. I mean, it was exactly on the nose, and I laughed hysterically. And every time I laugh at that, I think of San Diego and the fact that you could actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
So so I do think that some of the jokes are spot on for the time, but they're also things you kind of look back on, which goes back to why you can't watch this movie back to back to back. You have to spread it out like every, I would say, 7 to 10 years or so. Maybe like pieces of it along the way at some point because somebody made a reference to it. But I think this is a 7 to 10 movie rewatch kind of thing to make sure you're not slammed in the face with the same cultural references going, there it is again.
Yeah, I agree. So here's something else I got on my notes that I kind of want to touch on. And, it's this kind of jumping back to where we talked about that it had like a lot of Disney references. And I don't know if you remember, if you saw it on our Uber Nerds deal, somebody posted a cartoon of if Disney movies, certain specific Disney movies had mothers, and it showed like the Little Mermaid, the mother reasoning with the father. It's like, don't have a temper tantrum, it's a fling, or like she'll probably get over him in a little while, and therefore the whole thing of Little Mermaid never happened. Beauty and the Beast, it's like, I love him, and it's like, what are you kidding me? That's Stockholm Syndrome. No, this is not going to happen. There were a couple other movies they made that would have been different had the mother been present. And I have to point out that, again, and this also goes back to my disappointment that, we had Julie Andrews playing the Queen Mother in this, that there could have been so much more, because it's Julie freaking Andrews,
I agree.
And she sort of touched on being the reasonable mother that was the peacemaker, especially that whole dinner scene, everything, and she was kind of doing it, and it's like, everybody be calm and everything, and they squandered it. They
didn't really seem to go anywhere with that except for her to be, I don't want to say henpecking, but to just say lines like, oh, give her time, she'll always hate you for this, or whatever. It was kind of platitudes.
And that's the thing, if they had really done that to me, that would have been really like, the anti-Disney jab, saying that, hey, you know what, you always got these single parent situations, they always get out of control and everything. Here we have one where both parents are present and the mother is reasoning with the father. Yeah, take that, Disney. And they just took that sword and turned it on themselves and went,
They could have made some references about, you remember when that young girl in wherever, met that filthy beast or whatever, and they fell in love, or something,
Yeah, and again, wasted opportunities. But yeah, Julie Andrews, come on!
I got to agree. Again, going back to the voice talents, I liked the actors that played the roles, but again, you didn't really do anything with them. John Cleese, you had so much talent there, and you didn't really capitalize on it. One of the things that, speaking of the parents and meeting the parents, what is your fairy tale take on living happily ever after? When at the end of the first movie and the beginning of this one, they show that Shrek and Fiona got married, but they never met her parents.
I don't get what you're trying to say.
So, in most fairy tales, they live happily ever after. And if you recall from, I think it was the 80s, there was actually an ABC television series that had, it was called Ever After, and it was like Snow White after her happily ever after moment, and it was just one of those daily grind kind of things where like, oh yeah, this is happily ever after, huh? But in Shrek, they tilted on its ear just a little bit. They're happily ever after, and they show what happens after the happily ever after of the first movie, and Now they're already married and they're going to meet their parents. Do you think that that's a fairy tale trope that, finally after they had their happily ever after, they go meet the parents, or?
No, I don't want to say a fairy tale trope. I think that was taking the fairy tale and turning it up on its...
And that's kind of what I thought, turning it on its ear and saying, God.
Yeah, here's your happily ever after, deal with that. This is the honeymoon's over. You think everything's going to be great? Nope, meet the parents, start your life.
Yeah.
This is it.
And from a cultural standpoint, usually people meet the parents before they ever get married, because usually, especially for a princess, you would think that the father would give the daughter away, that the king would, present his princess and that sort of thing. I kind of found that interesting as a cultural construct conversation.
Well, considering, the events of the first movie, you kind of understand why that didn't happen.
Yes, I will agree with you there.
Which brings me, if I may, change the subject just a little bit, which brings me to something that I did think of in this movie that they didn't touch on. I forget the original villain. Farquhar? Yeah, was he a prince or a duke or a king?
Lord.
What was he?
He was a lord.
Lord
I guess I'm not sure what his royal lineage was.
Yeah, nobody, when the fairy godmother and the king were talking about, like, how could this happen, and, it was supposed to be Prince Charming that kissed her, yeah, nobody blamed Farquhar for that, because really, he's the one that sent Shrek to go get Fiona.
Yeah.
He was the one that wanted her for himself.
Does it really have to have continuity?
For me? Look who you're asking.
I'm just saying.
For the general audience, no. But for me, yeah, I would like a little bit of reference and everything to make things a little more solid, a little bit of continuity, a little bit of nostalgia.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I would have liked that.
All right.
But, oh well.
I think they picked up the continuity sort of thing in 3 and 4, in that things progressed in sort of a normal relativistic way. I think when they made this one, it was more of a, hey, people like this. We might be able to make another one. But, I don't know, it was just interesting. I did like the fact that the Shrek movies in general tend to take the fairy tale tropes and poke holes in them and go, see what happens? Like, this is what happens afterwards. The fairy godmother as the godfather, if you will, come to make you an offer you can't refuse kind of thing. Like, hey, if you want to be happy...
Who turned out to be the CEO of a large evil corporation.
Yes, damned evil corporations. There were a lot of things in this movie that were, again, tropes dialed up to 11 that they just toyed with, pop culture references. I'm kind of running out of things to say about this movie because it's not terribly deep.
No, I got one thing, and this might actually get a little deep. I was saving this for the right segues, and I guess this is as good as it's going to get.
Okay.
The music. Now, we've talked about music soundtracks, putting us somewhere, taking us to a particular time, or giving us a certain mood. And there's film-related YouTube videos on some of the channels that I enjoy listening to that talk about the importance of soundtrack and what they can do if they're used properly. For me, and I'm going to start off by saying what my opinion of the soundtrack on this one and everything, they used a lot of popular music in this one. And I just think that for this movie, a lot of the music, it was either... the cash-in, like, oh, let's use a popular song that everybody likes so people will come watch this movie, or there are punchlines. Especially like at the ball, I Need a Hero.
I agree, and that was okay with me because, again, I wasn't taking this movie as high art. I think the very first song was, Accidentally in Love, and that was played to scene.
Yeah.
Montage sort of scene of them falling in love. I didn't really have an issue with the soundtrack. I thought the songs were used appropriately for what they used. I think that the biggest issue that I kind of had in general was it nailed it to a specific time frame. There was nothing that's not screaming, with the exception of I Need a Hero, that doesn't nail it to the 2000s. Even, Ricky Martin, Livin' La Vida Loca. Like, that really doesn't evoke a sense of, like, oh, yes, I remember the timeless classic by Ricky Martin. Living that crazy life.
Yeah, I think for me, the thought that kept running through my head every time they played a certain song whatever. It's just that it just didn't feel sincere. And to really kind of illustrate that, to bring another reference or anything to illustrate that, I got to bring up Quentin Tarantino's use of music in his films.
Okay.
They don't necessarily have to take you back because they're, obviously, like Pulp Fiction, his first big hit. That was contemporary times. That could be today. Doesn't really, the 90s / could be the 2000s.
Yeah.
Granted, the world doesn't look too different from either or. Minor details, but other than that, pretty similar. A lot of his music, though, was from decades earlier, from the last generation, so to say. Hits from...
Yeah, it was old nostalgic flashbacky type stuff, or not flashbacky,
70s,
but yeah.
60s, And he does that a lot in a lot of his other movies, too, especially, like, was it Django Unchained had a few songs that were definitely not from the Old West. They're from the 60s. But the thing is their usage, they're very scene and mood and tone appropriate, In other words, they have a level of sincerity that I just didn't get from this one. This one, it's like, oh yeah, this one looks like fun. Yeah, Accidentally in Love may been somewhat appropriate, but still, it's a fun little ditty, and it just makes everybody feel good because they're falling in love and everything. But like I said, it's just, I had a problem that it just didn't feel sincere. And that was the best word I could think of, is sincerity of its music.
You have a point. I don't know that I agree with it wholeheartedly. I don't have a good example of anything to counter that point. So I thought that I Need a Hero was fun and appropriate. Was it sincere? I don't think the whole movie was incredibly sincere as a concept. So,
well, I don't know. I thought the theme of sacrifice, compromise for love or anything, that had a level of sincerity to it. It's like, not everything I have to say about this movie is entirely bad.
Well, I don't think we've said everything bad about this movie.
No, but but that was a good, sincere theme. I mean, at least, again, I wish they would have developed that a little bit more.
I agree.
But it was a good thing that they had going. Everything. What are you willing to do for the one you love? How much are you willing to change for the one you love? That was a great theme. And they had some moments, where you kind of felt somebody turned the fire on in the old chest there. Do I feel it and everything? And then it just kind of went away, and I'm like, oh, okay, turn it off.
I think a lot of comedy movies do that. They'll take something and they'll put you in a moment and then punch it up with a joke, and you're like, you had me at hello, and then you didn't.
Yeah, it was you lit the match to light the kindling to get those feelings burning and everything, and then somebody just sneezed right on the match.
My cockles were warming. There were the cockles of my heart warming. You're cold.
I was almost there. I almost got choked up. Couple of scenes, but they didn't get there, and I'm just...
Yeah.
And again, I thought if you had the right music that even pushed it further, I'd have gotten there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that had they taken the what are you willing to do, who are you willing to become to make your significant other happy, I think that's a very valid conversational point. I also think that the miscommunication of somebody thinking that they have to change because of insecurities when the other person is perfectly okay with who they are. Sure, they would make some minor tweaks. I mean, I think that's reasonably normal. Like, hey, could you stop chewing with your mouth open, or, leave the toilet seat down, that sort of thing. I think that there are other behavioral modifications that I'm sure even after being married for 20 years that my wife would want to change about me, but she doesn't want me to change who I am. She just wants me to stop doing a thing, or maybe not be so obstinate about things. I could say the same thing. There's some things that I wish she would stop doing, but again, after 20 years, it's not her overall personage that I want to change. I just want to modify a few little things here and there. And apparently she does listen to the podcast, so when she comes to me and asks, I will be put on the spot and go, no, actually, I just love you just the way you are. I love you just the way you are.
That's why I will appreciate living 2,500 miles away from you.
And I'm not saying that to be mean or to say anything, but I'm merely saying that in any relationship, no one makes you 100% happy every single second of every single day. There are always things that you wish somebody would stop doing, but after a while, it just becomes something you're like, oh yeah, I guess if I thought about it, I would say I would appreciate you not leaving your hairbrush on the bathroom counter or whatever, but that's not the reason that I love you, so I'm willing to accept that this thing happens. You know what I'm saying? You know, it's more about the overall relationship as opposed to the individual thing. And that's what I think that this movie does, is makes you think about how much of a change you're willing to make. I mean, at the end of the movie, Shrek did change. You know, he was less willing to get as angry, but he was also finally accepting of the fact that Fiona loved him for who he was, an ogre. And if you'll pardon the turn of phrase, warts and all, because ogres have warts, blah, 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 blah. And they have layers, like onions.
I remember that joke. Like onions.
Ogres have layers, like onions.
Which is kind of funny. Their carriage looked like a big onion, and it had layers.
Yeah.
If you looked out the window, it was like little layered.
Yeah, and the carriage shaped like an onion or garlic.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about something else.
No. The carriage that they rode
yeah.
all the way to far away.
Are we there yet? So that one went on a little long. I kind of get where they were going with it. Like, it's a long way. But something that I'd put in my notes was they did have really good examples of a concept we've discussed before, the triple, where it's like, are we there yet? No. Are we there yet? No. Are we there yet? Yes. We are? No. You know, so you change it up on the third one. There were a lot of good examples in this movie of that. So, again, from a comedic standpoint, it was a good, solid comedy. It just wasn't terribly groundbreaking. I had fun, and I think that really actually wraps up kind of my final thoughts when we get there, so I don't actually need to add anything. Did you have anything you wanted to add, or any more you wanted to talk about?
No, that was my notes.
Yeah.
But like I said, the last thing I really wanted to touch on was the music and everything, because, you know, that's such an important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think the music is, in any movie, is underrated in its importance sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like the music is what really sets up things. I mean, it really puts you in a place, even before the visuals. I mean, how many movies do we know that where the music starts before we actually see something?
Oh yeah, it's especially useful in horror genre. You know, the suspenseful music. You know, in romance, in romantic movies, the sweeping strings to sort of put you in the moment and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing. How many movies do you know of that where the music is playing before you actually see anything on the screen?
I don't know. I mean, it depends on the scene.
Well, think of the opening scene of Apocalypse Now, where the images fade in, but you kind of start to hear the music start before the image really becomes clear. And like I said, it was you know, the Doors, The End. Yeah. You know, that really set a tone. I mean, to me, that's one of the top 10, if not the top 3 uses of music before you even see anything on the screen. So that's where it's done right.
Okay. I agree. Again, I don't think you can compare Shrek 2 to Apocalypse Now, except that they both have music. And they're both movies.
Give us another podcast. I think we could. You can compare any movie. Cause
that's true.
That's what I love about movies. You can compare whatever you want, and you can find relationships anywhere.
And we've done that before, and we did it in this movie where we went down the rabbit hole for a good long time when we started talking about Airplane and all the other things that again, I didn't have anything in my notes about Airplane. You know, it was more of a conversation point that we started wandering down.
You know, before we close this out, too, there was one reference that I had in my mind, but, you know, it's like during the conversation didn't allow me to interject it and everything, but the big giant gingerbread man's name was Mongo, and we talked about fart jokes. Mm-hmm. And as we mentioned in our podcast on Blazing Saddles, that was the first movie to use a fart as a fart joke.
And this movie took it to the extreme.
But that also goes up to the point, I don't know how many times I can watch Blazing Saddles and still laugh at the fart scene.
Yeah.
Hey, cook, how about more beans? I think you had enough. And that still makes me laugh, no matter what.
And again, because it's not time specific, there's no time in your life where beans didn't make farts, which, I mean, fart jokes are funny, again, so that makes it timeless comedy, as opposed to some of the jokes in Shrek are nailed down to a specific period.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, though. I mean, the mud bath scene where they both fart, make the bubbles, make it in a jacuzzi, and the fairies are all dying and everything, and it's like, okay, mildly funny. If you made me watch that 5 minutes later, I wouldn't even chuckle.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh yeah, that happened.
It was well placed.
So I wonder, though, it's like, you know, what is that? Why is it that Blazing Saddles makes me laugh, and this one only makes me laugh once?
One, because we've seen so many examples of fart jokes throughout history. Blazing Saddles was, as you mentioned, the first, and as such, it set a tone. The entire movie is overall funny, and it touches such a different aspect of humanity as opposed to this movie, which, again, touches on some important themes that we've talked about. It's not nearly as satirically prescient, if you will, as Blazing Saddles. There's nothing in here that's of questionable morality. It's, what are you going to do? Blazing Saddles touched on all kinds of crap. You're like, oh my. You have hit everything. You have insulted everyone and made everyone laugh at the same time. This is a good, safe comedy that has, as you mentioned, a lot of body humor, a lot of pop culture references that people 40 years from now will probably not necessarily get. If they watch this, they'll be mildly amused by some of the stuff, but if you don't get the reference, it's not as funny. So that's why, leading into where this would go on my shelf, from the standpoint of overall comedic value, overall movie value, this is a solid general population movie. Again, I enjoyed it. It made a lot of money, but it's general population.
And if I owned it as well, that's exactly where it would go. General population. Something I would probably put on to, for Tesla to be entertained once in a while, maybe. It's like, hey, yeah, let's leave Tesla here. What, by herself? No, with the television. Which, by the way, was a line uttered by Antonio Banderas in the movie Four Rooms.
Oh, well, there you go then, Antonio Banderas. See the connection.
Boom, 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 6 degrees less.
Yay! That is a lot of fun. We should actually try that on an episode one time, just see how far we can bring it back around. I don't know what we would do it with. Anyway, all right, well, we have discussed how this movie got on my shelf. Talked about the movie, we talked about where it belongs on our shelf, really sort of wrapped it up with final thoughts, didn't have any listener feedback. I guess now, since this is episode 34, our next episode ends with a 5 or a 0, it'd be episode 35, so we are doing a random listener pick, and that means that it is now time to push the button, unless you disagree, Dan?
Nope, I'm waiting with bated breath
to
see what our audience has picked for us.
Listerine.
Ghostbusters.
Oh, our most recent addition to the list.
Nice.
Ghostbusters. And that is Ghostbusters 1984, not the new remake. So I'm going to enjoy this one. I think this would be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about on this.
Oh, absolutely. This is the movie that keeps on giving.
I think especially in the category of music, talk about sincerity versus insincerity and appropriateness. I think this one... there's going to be much to talk about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay. Well, listeners, thank you for selecting our next movie, Ghostbusters, randomly. Again, we still have a few more left. But if you want to comment on this episode or any other episodes, you can do so by hitting us up on our Facebook page, hitting us up on the Twitters, and emailing us at WRIOS2016mr@gmail.com. And with that, Dan, your movie-themed goodbye is... Nice. Well done. Well done. Could you stop being so annoying? All right, listeners, we will see you in 2 weeks with Ghostbusters 1984.